the entire world is once again turning its eyes toward the Pacific with a mix of unease and anticipation. Tension between China and the United States has just reached one of its most critical points in years. And this time, Beijing's message leaves no room for interpretation. China has issued a direct warning to Donald Trump. If Washington continues down the same path, there will be real consequences. The signals arrived with an unusually sharp tone, even by Chinese standards. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs used forceful expressions, carefully chosen words meant to send an unequivocal message to the White House. China is not only displeased with new tariffs and technological restrictions. It is drawing red lines and making clear that it will no longer tolerate what it sees as systematic economic and political aggression. For months, the Trump administration has doubled down on its pressure strategy against Beijing. New tariffs on steel, aluminum, electronics, and strategic sectors like artificial intelligence and semiconductors. The official argument is to protect jobs and national security in the United States. But behind that discourse lies a much deeper conflict, an open struggle for control of global economic power. What was once a trade war has become a war for technological, financial, and political supremacy. Trump has turned foreign trade into a negotiation weapon. Every tariff, every sanction, every export restriction is used as another piece on a board where the objective is to slow China's rise as a global power. Beijing, however, is no longer the passive actor it once was a decade ago. This week's warnings are the response of a country that has learned to play by the same rules as the United States, and it is doing so with surgical precision. High-level economists in Beijing have described this new stage as a silent war. It is not fought with cannons or tanks, but with currencies, supply chains, artificial intelligence, and control of strategic resources. China knows its main strength does not lie in missiles or troop numbers, but in its economic power. It controls 70% of global rare earth production, dominates key sectors of artificial intelligence, and has become the main creditor of the U.S. Treasury. And that is precisely where its most dangerous card begins to play. China's warnings include the possibility of reducing its exposure to U.S. debt. A move that, even if symbolic at first, could have a devastating effect on global financial markets. Because if the largest foreign holder of treasury bonds were to sell a significant share of its reserves, Washington's financing costs would skyrocket within days. Trump knows this. His economic team knows this. And the Pentagon knows it too. That is why, behind patriotic speeches and press conferences, there is an evident nervousness. China is using the power of its economy as a deterrent tool, a way to remind Washington that interdependence has two sides. If one falls, the other bleeds too. Tensions intensified after the Trump administration announced a new round of 100% tariffs on Chinese tech products. The argument was simple: protect American industry from what they describe as unfair competition. But China's response was swift. Beijing labeled the measures a hostile provocation and warned it would respond with the necessary firmness. In Chinese diplomatic language, that phrase is equivalent to an open threat. Beijing does not threaten impulsively. When it chooses to speak, it is because the actions backing its words are already prepared. And this time, the moves are underway. Chinese technology and energy companies have begun diversifying export markets toward Asia, Africa, and Latin America. State banks have been instructed to gradually reduce their exposure to dollars and increase operations in local currencies. It is a strategy of resistance, but also a declaration of independence. Trump, true to his style, responded with irony and social media messages, insisting that the United States is winning. But the numbers tell a different story. Import costs have risen, inflation shows no sign of easing, and pressure on domestic consumption is increasingly evident. The supposed war for prosperity is leaving deep scars on the American economy. On the political front, the tension is also palpable. National security advisors have pushed to strengthen alliances with Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines to counter China's influence in Asia. But the problem is that many of these allies are beginning to question Washington's leadership. They see in the Trump administration a foreign policy shaped more by impulse than strategy. Meanwhile, China keeps moving forward steadily. It invests in infrastructure, expands its influence in Africa, strengthens its position in Southeast Asia, and consolidates the Belt and Road Initiative, a massive global connectivity project that already involves more than 140 countries. The warning to the United States is not an isolated event. It is the culmination of a process. China is sending a message to the world. It will no longer accept unilateral pressure or economic blackmail. The time has come to redefine the global balance. And it is doing so through the economy, not military force. Instead of deploying troops, it deploys credit. Instead of imposing sanctions, it offers agreements. Instead of forcing compliance, it persuades with infrastructure and financing. That is its way of building influence. And more countries are accepting that offer. In Washington, concern is growing. Reports from the Treasury Department and the State Department share the same conclusion. The global influence of the United States is weakening while China becomes the center of gravity of the world economy. And what is most unsettling is that, for the first time in half a century, the international system is beginning to adapt to that shift. The Chinese message also has a domestic dimension. Beijing is sending a signal to its population. The Communist Party will not yield to foreign pressure. It is a strategy to reinforce national unity and fuel patriotic pride in a moment of global uncertainty. Chinese social networks filled with messages celebrating the government's firm stance against Washington. For ordinary citizens, the dispute with Trump is not just an economic issue. It is a matter of national identity, a way to show that China no longer bows to anyone. But behind that pride lies a legitimate concern. No one in Beijing wants a total trade war. The two economies are deeply interconnected. Millions of jobs, global supply chains, and the stability of the world's financial system depend on that relationship. That is why, more than a frontal challenge, China's warning is a strategic one, an attempt to set boundaries before the situation spirals out of control. As the days go by, international markets are beginning to reflect the stress. The dollar loses ground against the yuan, treasury bonds show signs of instability, and Asian stock markets experience strong volatility. Analysts agree on one point. If this confrontation escalates, the impact could be felt worldwide. The trade war between the two largest powers does not stay in headlines. It translates into inflation, unemployment, declining trade, and global economic contraction. Trump, for his part, seems determined to hold his ground. His discourse focuses on the idea of regaining control, bringing production back to U.S. soil, and demanding respect. But the international context is different. The protectionism that worked in the 1980s does not have the same effect in an interdependent economy. Today, isolation means losing competitiveness. China knows this and plays with patience. It does not need to win a war in months. It only needs to resist. With each passing year, its economy becomes more diversified, its influence grows, and its negotiation capacity strengthens. Meanwhile, inside the United States, some industrial sectors are beginning to speak out. Manufacturing companies warn about rising costs, agricultural exporters fear losing access to their biggest customer, and consumers feel the burden of higher prices. Patriotic rhetoric is no longer enough to hide the real impact of the confrontation. China's warning is not just a diplomatic gesture. It is a mirror. It shows the United States what the rest of the world is beginning to see, that American hegemony is no longer unquestionable, and that the era in which Washington dictated rules without opposition has come to an end. The risk, however, is that neither side wants to yield. If Trump escalates sanctions and China responds with equivalent measures, the global financial system could enter a phase of destabilization. It is not a matter of who wins or loses. It is a matter of who can endure longer before the damage becomes irreversible. In the coming months, the global balance will depend on a thin line, the ability of both powers to negotiate without losing face. But one thing is clear, the The era of empty warnings is over. China is speaking with the voice of a consolidated power. And the United States, under Trump's leadership, faces the dilemma of how to maintain its dominance without destroying the system that allowed it to rise. The geopolitical clock keeps ticking. And as statements clash and markets tremble, the question remains the same. Can the world's two greatest superpowers avoid a new global fracture? Like the video and subscribe to Punto Critico to understand how the decisions of power change the course of the world.